There are 195 countries in the world with a combined population estimated at just under 8 billion people. Jamaica, with its population of 2.8 million on island and another estimated 2.2 million in the diaspora, has succeeded in doing what the majority of these countries have been unable to do, and that is to export its culture around the world. According to a CNN report made public just before the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro, Jamaica ranked third in the world in terms of its cultural importance. In other words, according to the CNN report, Jamaica was the third most culturally influential country in the world, and this was behind China and Brazil. Now, this whole discussion of culture becomes important against a background of a report that I saw in the Observer early this past week. And this really had to do with this business of valuing of the Jamaican culture. The sense was that the powers that be have been unable to define the value of Jamaica's culture, which, as far as I'm concerned, is not surprising, because to be able to appreciate the value of your culture, a lot of that has to do with exposure and primarily with your education. Jamaica, you may or may not be aware, has made significant disinvestment in how it offers and delivers education to its population. And as a consequence, I think that disinvestment, the manifestation of that disinvestment is what we now are experiencing. But to the report in the Observer, there was a Jamaica Business Development Corporation forum which was held on Monday of the past week, where Olayenko Jacobs-Bonnick, the National Program Officer for Culture and Coordinator for the Creative Caribbean Project for UNESCO, was saying that based on the many contributions of culture and creative industries, a true estimate of value is crucial to the sector's development and to help with promoting that shift that will help to effect meaningful change for its players. It has always been my view that the richness of our culture is something that we have not been able to capitalize on, and that's reasonable, because if we are unable to recognize the significance and the value of this culture, then we're basically taking stuff for granted. The elements of our culture, to begin with, you want to be looking at things like our music. You want to look at our food, dance, art, sports. And of course, we can always argue that we can look at sports on its own. But for the purpose of this conversation, I want to bring them all together. Education is a significant component of being able to appreciate value in anything, right? And if we have a situation where our country has disinvested in the education of its population, and this disinvestment is not an event that transpired or developed in the last 3, 5, or even 10 years. But for decades, we have managed to keep our population in a state of flux, if you will, by housing students in institutions almost like warehouses, where in the main, more than 60% of these students leaves school no better than how they started. And so if you don't have an appreciation, if you're unable to appreciate something, it is going to be very, very difficult for you to ascribe any kind of value onto it. But that is the bottom side of the whole thing. In the, at the top of the pile, you want to look at your institutions, government institutions. We have a Ministry of Culture, and the Ministry of Culture has been charged with the responsibility for shepherding the development of the culture portfolio. The problem is that there is a divorcing of that portfolio with respect to its business component. Culture is business, and culture is money. And by extension, if you really want to be getting value or being able to appreciate the value of that culture, what you should be doing is perhaps placing the value component of that culture in the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, because it is the commercial component of the culture that is going to drive the country's economic progress. It requires very little thinking when you consider it, that culture, based on where we are and what we have accomplished, should be a significant driver of the economic life of our country. For example, music. Jamaican music is the single largest drawing card for visitors coming into Jamaica. And this has not been so since yesterday. We have started our foray into music some 70 odd years ago, when we started to do recorded works in Jamaica. And over the years, we have managed to develop some 7-8 genres of music, to the extent that the United Nations Education and Scientific Council has, on at least 2 occasions, singled out Jamaica for its contribution to global music development. In fact, the UNESCO declared Kingston as a cultural city for its contribution of some 7 genres of music to the world. And this would have been somewhere in, between 2015. And a few years later, the same UNESCO declared reggae to be a cultural artifact that required protection. The question that one has to ask is, what have we done with that? Music is the most significant drawing card, I've stated, for tourists coming into Jamaica. But in spite of the fact that we have been involved with producing recorded music for more than 70 years, and in spite of the fact that reggae music is now more than 50 years old as a major part of the Jamaican culture, there is no place in Jamaica where a visitor can decide to go on a visit to Jamaica where they can spend a couple of hours walking through the hallowed halls of Jamaican music, or to listen to some live Jamaican music at any given point in time. In fact, our tourism facilities have to a large extent sold themselves off reggae music. So people who are coming to Jamaica for vacation, what they find themselves being treated to is Spanish-laced cabaret, coming from the Dominican Republic or from Latin America. Some Latin American troupe who bears very little relationship to that which has made Jamaica popular. In spite of the fact that we are producing musicians, we're producing singers, vocalists, songwriters, by the dozens. Our tourism industry is not embracing this in a way that would benefit the culture. The other side of it is those who are responsible for articulating, and authoring the cultural policies have not seen the necessity to put the investment in that will provide the kind of superstructure upon which we can build out our Jamaican music. We embrace the music. We put it into our advertising. The Jamaica Tourist Board and some of the bigger hotels, gladly embrace the music as the advertising draw for the visitors. But there is no place. There isn't a Jamaica performance hall, if you will, where people can know that any given day of the week you can go to this place and you're going to be treated to some reggae music, an area where you can combine different aspects of the culture, in fact, right? I have a vision of a space like this where you can be treated to some live music, you can be treated to some Jamaican food, that you're marrying the food with the music, somewhere where you can also be able to, embrace a little piece of the Jamaican art, because it's all within this facility. And my sense is that if I have the ability to conceptualize that, I can't see why my betters and the people who are authoring policy is unable to do that. And so what we end up with is situations where others have basically taken hold of elements of our culture that we should be hanging on to. I'll give you a case in point. The Scatolites, which is, essentially the foundation upon which popular Jamaican music has been built. And Scatolites may not have had a long run, but the catalog of music that they produced in the couple of years that they existed is seminal to the history of Jamaican music. Today, Scatolites, the Scatolites band is owned by a foreigner who has no connection whatsoever to Jamaica. And by extension, that whole catalog of music gets locked up in abeyance because there is no disputes and cross disputes in terms of ownership. Bottom line is, as a country that created this music form, ska, and the jump blues and so on, the R&B that the Scatolites framed and presented as the foundation of Jamaican music, we have lost that. It is the same thing that is happening with other Jamaican creators or other Jamaican creators, especially from that era, because in the first instance, as a country, we did not invest in developing the academic foundation of our people. And by extension, the people who were creating this music didn't have the technical skills or the ability to be able to protect themselves. And here we are, 50, 70 years later, and a lot of these artists are basically now, dying of hunger because their work was never placed in the kind of structure that will allow them to benefit from it. And it is my view that as a country, we are responsible for that. Again, because we have not educated our population, that population is unable to appreciate the value of its culture. And so, art, for example, fine arts, the value of Jamaican art is hardly represented on a global scale. Global art market is worth somewhere in the ballpark of about $87 billion. A good 50% of that is consumed right here in the United States, with Japan and the United Kingdom picking up the lion's share of what is left. Jamaica's art is hardly visible. And so this is one of the reasons why, I myself took it up, as my own responsibility to champion the promotion of Jamaica's art and culture on this side of the pond. The job, though, would have been a lot easier if we had an approach back home in Jamaica that sensitized people about the culture. The dance is another feature of Jamaican culture that only a handful of Jamaicans are able to appreciate. And in fact, when you look at the stigma that we associated with the dance back in Jamaica in that 1970s and 1980s period, what has happened is the art form is only appreciated within a small subset of Jamaicans. Yet the National Dance Theatre Company is now celebrating its 61st year and is one of the most recognized group of dancers in the world. Jamaican music, and I just want to touch back on that a little bit. While we have embraced reggae music, it is apparent that we are prepared to throw away other aspects of, our music culture. Dancehall and DJ music is seen as unwanted in the very same way that we treated reggae music and ska in the 1960s and the 1970s. For a large part of those 2 decades, this music wasn't even played on radio. The people who produced this music were seen as throwaway people. And so because we have this snobbishness associated with the creators and the producers of these art forms, the general public adopts the same attitude and turns their nose up. Jamaicans will come here to America and they will go to Walmart and or to the department store to buy a piece of inexpensive art, as opposed to supporting their own artists, both here in the diaspora and back home, because we don't have an appreciation for the value. An artist is essentially a storyteller. A piece of art is capturing a piece of the history of the country in the very same way that the musician, the songwriter, captures aspects of the country's history in their lyrics. Even if the lyrics may be talking about the gunman and the shutter and so on, it is the artist expressing what they are experiencing within their domestic environment. And so until we are able to change that stigma that we attach to not just the various art forms, but primarily to the participants, the creators of the respective art forms. There is a view that, the people who are responsible for creating these art forms are not from the Jamaican elite, and by extension, they are not let in. And as a consequence, there is no policy framework that is designed around the culture per se. And without a policy framework, it becomes very difficult for you to be able to determine value. Yet, it is the culture that is providing that fillip as far as employment creation is concerned. Keep in mind that a local artist or artisan is not costing the country any foreign exchange of any repute, and in fact can become a net foreign exchange earner. But what we need to do is to change our attitude. My sense is that what we really want to be doing is to be looking seriously at how do we remove the stigma that we have attached to a lot of these content creators. And by extension, how do we get greater appreciation of the aspects of our culture to run throughout the whole gamut of the Jamaican society. Our athletic program has shown a significant amount of progress and successful participants over the years. But even then, some of these people are still deemed as coming from the bowels, and even where they are successful, they are treated in a lot of instances with slight. My sense is that what we need to be doing is to change our attitudes. And a big part of that attitudinal change is going to only come about if we change the way we look at providing education. We have to look at now educating all of our population along similar lines. People need to be presented with the same opportunities at all levels, and then let the chips fall where they may. An educated population is a progressive population, and a progressive population is always going to drive the economic progress of your nation. My sense is that while we have lost our way to a large extent, there is still time. But that time has to be spent with taking a serious look at how we educate our youngsters, how we inform them as to the value. A piece of art is telling a story. Look at the producers of this art, people like Barrington Watson, his son Basil Watson, who is now one of the foremost sculptors in the world. Look at people like Malachi Capo Reynolds, who, as an intuitive artist, took his talent to the pinnacle. People like Alexander Cooper, right? We want to be able to say to Jamaica, this is yours. Do I believe that we can do it? Absolutely. I see where we have this art walk that we have developed in downtown Kingston. That's a good start. But we now need to be able to marry other aspects of the culture with, so we're marrying art with music and food. And that little corridor that we now call the art walk should have a plethora of small restaurants, or what we call pop-up restaurants, that people can, as they walk through, they're sampling different aspects of Jamaican cuisine. Treat them to a mentor or a mentor band while they're doing the stuff. And probably at another end of the walk corridor, you have some, live Jamaican music that is playing there, that is looking at different aspects of the music culture. Again, we have to value it before others will value it. And I'm challenging all of us to, take the time out and to sensitize ourselves. Look at the factor that our artists or musicians are merely storytellers, and they are using the tools at their disposal to document aspects of the history of Jamaica, granted from their own perspective. Once we begin to do that, we are going to be able to change that paradigm and change the value. Let me have your feedback.